May 7th, 1942. Coral Sea, Southwest Pacific. Lieutenant Commander John S. Jimmy. Thach watched his radar scope aboard the carrier USS Lexington as Japanese aircraft formed up for their attack run. His fighter squadron, VF-3, sat on the flight deck, engines warming, pilots strapped into Grumman F4F Wildcats that every naval aviator knew were outclassed by the enemy. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M could outclimb, outmaneuver, and outrun the stubby American fighter in nearly every performance category. Japanese pilots called the Wildcat meat for the Zero. In 6 months of war, that assessment had proven devastatingly accurate. Thach had spent the previous months developing a solution to a problem that threatened American carrier aviation's very survival. His answer was so simple that senior officers initially dismissed it as inadequate. 2 fighters flying together in a defensive weaving pattern, each protecting the other's tail through coordinated turns. The maneuver required no technological advantage, no superior aircraft performance, just discipline and mutual trust between pilots. In the next 90 minutes, Thach would prove that tactics could overcome technology, that American ingenuity could defeat Japanese engineering, and that the Zero's reign of dominance was about to end. The story began not with brilliance, but with blood. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Oahu. As Japanese aircraft swept over Oahu that morning, American pilots scrambled in whatever fighters they could reach. The few Wildcats that got airborne faced Zeros for the first time in combat. The results were catastrophic. Lieutenant George Welch, flying a P-40 Warhawk, managed to shoot down 4 Japanese aircraft. But pilots in Wildcats found themselves in fights their aircraft couldn't win. The performance gap was immediately apparent. The Zero could climb at 3,000 feet per minute. The Wildcat managed 2,300. The Zero turned inside the Wildcat's turning radius with ease. The Zero's maximum speed of 331 miles per hour exceeded the Wildcat's 318 miles per hour. At high altitude, where thin air reduced engine power, the gap widened further. Japanese pilots had trained for years in combat maneuvers. American pilots had trained for peacetime operations that emphasized formation flying and gunnery against towed targets. The Wake Island garrison discovered the full extent of the problem when Japanese forces attacked on December 8th. Marine Fighting Squadron 211, equipped with 12 Wildcats, fought with desperate courage. In 2 weeks of combat, VMF 211 pilots shot down 7 Japanese aircraft confirmed, but lost all 12 Wildcats. The Japanese captured Wake on December 23rd. The surviving pilots had learned brutal lessons about fighting Zeros, but had no opportunity to share them. January 1942. Naval Air Station, San Diego, California. Lieutenant Commander Thach, recently promoted to command Fighting Squadron 3, studied intelligence reports from Pearl Harbor and Wake with growing alarm. The reports painted a consistent picture. The Zero dominated individual dogfights. American pilots who tried to maneuver with Zeros died. The few successful engagements occurred when American pilots used the Wildcat's advantages: superior diving speed, heavier construction that could absorb battle damage, and devastating firepower from 6.50 caliber machine guns. Thach understood the mathematics were unforgiving. The Zero's 14-cylinder Nakajima Sake radial engine produced 940 horsepower. The Wildcat's Pratt & Whitney R1830 produced 1,200 horsepower, but the American fighter weighed 1,500 pounds more. Power-to-weight ratio favoured the Zero. The Japanese fighter achieved its performance through ruthless weight reduction. No armour protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires. The Zero sacrificed survivability for manoeuvrability. American fighters made the opposite choice. The Wildcat carried armour plate behind the pilot's seat and around the engine. Fuel tanks were lined with rubber compounds that sealed bullet holes. The cockpit canopy could absorb small arms fire. These features added weight that reduced performance but increased the probability a pilot would survive being hit. In individual dogfights, the Zero's advantages proved decisive. But Thach realized individual dogfights were the wrong paradigm. He began experimenting with tactical formations that leveraged the Wildcat's strengths while negating the Zero's advantages. His insight was fundamental. American pilots didn't need to outturn Zeros. They needed to prevent Zeros from getting into turning fights. The solution required two fighters working as a team rather than individual aircraft competing for kills. February 1942. Kaneohe Naval Air Station, Hawaii. Thach gathered his squadron pilots in a briefing room and outlined his concept using matchsticks on a desk. Two Wildcats would fly parallel courses approximately 200 yards apart. When a Zero attacked one Wildcat, both fighters would turn toward each other, crossing paths. The Zero, committed to pursuing the first Wildcat, would find itself facing head-on into the second Wildcat's 6.50 caliber guns. If the Zero tried to follow the first Wildcat through the turn, it would present a perfect deflection shot to the second Wildcat. The maneuver required split-second timing and absolute trust. Pilots had to turn directly at each other at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, trusting their wingman to maintain the correct altitude. Fighter pilots were trained to be aggressive individualists competing for aerial victories. Thach was asking them to subordinate individual glory to mutual survival. The initial reaction was skeptical. Experienced pilots argued that turning away from an attacking Zero violated every instinct. Fighter doctrine emphasized aggressive attack, not defensive maneuvering. Some pilots questioned whether coordination would be possible in the chaos of combat when radio communications broke down and visibility was limited. Thach conducted training flights over Hawaii, drilling his pilots relentlessly on the weave pattern. Two Wildcats would take off, establish parallel courses, then practice crossing turns with increasing speed and tighter spacing. He recruited experienced pilots to play the role of attacking Zeros, diving on the Wildcat pairs to test the defensive pattern. The results were promising. Attackers found themselves repeatedly facing head-on fire or presenting deflection shots they couldn't avoid. By April 1942, VF-3 had perfected the maneuver. Thach called it the beam defense position. Pilots simply called it the Thach weave. The squadron departed Hawaii aboard USS Lexington on April 15th, heading for the Coral Sea, where intelligence indicated a major Japanese operation was developing. May 7th, 1942. Coral Sea, 0900 hours. The Battle of the Coral Sea began when American search planes located the Japanese carrier Shoho. Lexington and Yorktown launched 93 aircraft, including Thach's fighters providing escort. The strike group overwhelmed Shoho's defences, sinking the carrier in minutes. But the Americans knew this was merely the opening engagement. The main Japanese carrier force, including the fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, remained at large. That afternoon, Japanese scouts located the American carriers. Vice Admiral Takeo Takagi ordered an immediate strike. 69 aircraft launched from the Japanese carriers, 33 Valdive bombers, 18 Kate torpedo bombers, and 18 Zero fighters. The strike force formed up and headed toward the American task force. At 16:30 hours, radar aboard Lexington detected the incoming raid at 70 miles. Fighter direction officers scrambled every available Wildcat. Thach led 6 fighters from VF-3 aloft, climbing toward the incoming Japanese formation. The numbers were daunting: 6 Wildcats against 18 Zeros, plus the bomber escort. Every American pilot knew the Zero's reputation. In 6 months of war, Japanese fighters had dominated every engagement. Thach organised his fighters into 3 two-plane sections, flying the weave pattern he'd drilled into them over Hawaii. At 16:55 hours, the formations merged. Zeros immediately dove on the American fighters, expecting the individual dogfights that had proven so successful since December. What happened next stunned the Japanese pilots. As Zeros attacked, Thach's sections executed their weave. Two Wildcats would turn toward each other, crossing paths. The attacking Zero would suddenly face head-on fire from the second Wildcat while remaining within the first Wildcat's firing solution. Japanese pilots found themselves in a tactical situation they'd never encountered. Their superior turning ability became irrelevant. Every attack approach presented them with defensive fire from multiple angles. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare, flying as Thach's wingman, shot down one Zero head-on as it pursued another Wildcat. The Japanese pilot, committed to his attack, flew directly into O'Hare's gun line. The Zero exploded, scattering debris that forced O'Hare to fly through the wreckage. A second Zero attempted to follow a weaving Wildcat and presented a perfect deflection shot to O'Hare's section leader. That Zero fell in flames into the sea. The engagement lasted 15 minutes. The Japanese lost 5 Zeros, confirmed destroyed with 3 probables. Not a single American Wildcat was shot down. More importantly, the weave prevented the Zeros from establishing the individual dogfights where their performance advantages would have proven decisive. The Japanese bombers, deprived of effective fighter escort, faced concentrated anti-aircraft fire from the task force. Only limited damage was inflicted on Lexington despite the large attacking force. Thach landed aboard Lexington at 1720 hours, his Wildcat's guns empty, having expended all ammunition in the engagement. His after-action report documented the weave's effectiveness, but the real proof came in the survival of his entire section. In previous engagements, American fighters had suffered 30 to 40% losses when facing Zeros. VF-3 had suffered 0 losses while destroying multiple Japanese fighters. May 8, 1942, Coral Sea, dawn. The Battle of the Coral Sea's second day saw both carrier forces launch maximum strikes. Japanese aircraft from Shikaku and Zuikaku found Lexington and Yorktown. American strike groups found and damaged Shikaku. The tactical victory went to Japan. Lexington was mortally damaged and would sink that evening. But the strategic victory belonged to America. The Japanese invasion force bound for Port Moresby turned back. For the first time in the war, a Japanese offensive had been stopped. More significantly for naval aviation, the Thach weave had proven that American fighters could defeat Zeros despite inferior individual performance. Word spread through the fleet immediately. Fighter squadrons began training in the weave pattern. The tactical innovation that senior officers had initially dismissed as inadequate became standard doctrine within weeks. June 4, 1942. Midway Atoll, 0930 hours. 1 month after Coral Sea, Thach found himself in the most critical carrier battle of the Pacific War. VF-3 had transferred to USS Yorktown after Lexington's loss. Now Yorktown, along with Enterprise and Hornet, faced the Japanese carrier striking force that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Japanese dive bombers attacked Yorktown at 1200 hours. Zeros escorted the strike, confident in their ability to clear American fighters from the sky. Thach led his section into the attacking formation, executing the weave against multiple Zeros simultaneously. The Japanese pilots, expecting the individual combats where their training and aircraft performance had proven superior, found themselves in a tactical environment that negated those advantages. In one sequence that Thach described in his after-action report, 3 Zeros attacked his section. As the first Zero dove on Thach's wingman, both Wildcats executed their crossing turn. The Zero, committed to its attack, suddenly faced head-on fire from Thach while remaining in his wingman's gun sight. The Japanese pilot attempted to break off but flew directly into the concentrated fire. The Zero disintegrated at 200 yards. The second Zero tried to follow Thach through the turn. His wingman, completing the weave pattern, had a perfect deflection shot as the Zero presented its full profile. A 3-second burst from 6.50 caliber guns tore the Zero's wing off. The aircraft tumbled into the sea. The third Zero, recognizing the trap, attempted to climb away, but the Wildcat's superior diving speed allowed Thach to follow. At 300 yards, Thach fired a 5-second burst. The Zero's unarmoured fuselage couldn't withstand the .50 caliber rounds. Fire erupted from the engine. The pilot bailed out at 2,000 feet. 3 Zeros destroyed in less than 2 minutes. Zero losses achieved not through superior aircraft performance, but through superior tactics executed with discipline and coordination. The engagement demonstrated what American naval aviation had learned in 6 months of combat. Individual heroics couldn't defeat Zeros. Coordinated teamwork could. Yorktown took 3 bomb hits and was forced to withdraw. But Thach's fighters had prevented the Japanese from achieving the overwhelming strike results their planners expected. More importantly, American dive bombers caught the Japanese carriers with their decks full of armed aircraft. In 6 minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were mortally damaged. Hiryu launched a counterstrike that crippled Yorktown, but was itself destroyed by American dive bombers that afternoon. The Battle of Midway ended Japanese carrier dominance in the Pacific. 4 fleet carriers lost, their irreplaceable air groups destroyed, the strategic initiative permanently shifted to America. The Thach Weave hadn't won Midway, American dive bombers did. But the Weave had allowed American fighters to survive against Zeros long enough for those dive bombers to strike. July 1942, Naval Air Station, San Diego. The Navy's Fighter Training Unit analysed combat reports from Coral Sea and Midway. The statistics were undeniable. Fighter squadrons using the Thach Weave suffered 60% fewer losses than squadrons attempting individual dogfights with Zeros. More significantly, squadrons using the Weave were shooting down Zeros at ratios approaching 2-to-1, despite flying inferior aircraft. The Weave became mandatory training for all fighter squadrons. Pilot training curriculum was revised to emphasize section tactics over individual combat. The competitive culture that had rewarded individual aerial victories evolved toward team coordination, where mutual survival took priority over personal glory. Japanese pilots noticed something had changed in American fighter tactics, but couldn't identify the specific innovation. Zero pilots reported that American fighters were fighting in pairs and that isolated Wildcats had become rare. Japanese tactical doctrine emphasized individual combat skills. Their training system produced exceptional pilots through years of rigorous selection and training. But this strength became a weakness when facing an opponent who refused to fight individually. August 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The Guadalcanal campaign demonstrated the Weave's effectiveness in sustained combat. Marine and Navy fighter squadrons operating from Henderson Field faced daily attacks by Japanese aircraft flying from Rabaul. Zeros escorted every bombing raid. The Japanese expected their fighters to dominate, just as they had at Wake, in the Philippines, and over Java. Instead, they encountered Marine Wildcat pilots flying the Thach Weave with aggressive discipline. Major John L. Smith, commanding VMF 223, scored 19 confirmed victories in 6 weeks while losing only 4 pilots. His squadron used the Weave exclusively, refusing to engage Zeros in individual turning fights. Captain Marion Carl, scoring 18.5 victories, credited the Weave with his survival. "We never tried to dogfight the Zero. We'd weave, get one good pass, and if that didn't work, we'd use our diving speed to break off and set up another weave." The Japanese lost approximately 800 aircraft over Guadalcanal in 6 months. Many fell to the island's anti-aircraft defences, or were destroyed on the ground. But American fighters using the Weave accounted for a significant percentage of Japanese losses while suffering dramatically lower casualties than earlier campaigns. October 1942. Santa Cruz Islands. The last major carrier battle of 1942 saw the Thach weave tested against Japan's elite carrier fighter pilots. The battle was tactically a Japanese victory. The carrier Hornet was sunk and Enterprise damaged, but American fighters inflicted heavy casualties on Japanese air groups that proved irreplaceable. Japanese carrier doctrine depended on highly trained pilots who required years to develop. Each Zero pilot lost represented an investment in training that couldn't be quickly replaced. American doctrine emphasized adequate training that could be accelerated when necessary. The weave allowed adequately trained pilots to survive against superior opponents long enough to gain combat experience. By early 1943, the tactical balance had shifted. Japanese carrier air groups had suffered 50% casualties since Pearl Harbor. Replacement pilots received reduced training as Japan's need for numbers increased. American pilots arrived with training specifically designed around the weave and other tactical innovations. The Zero still possessed superior individual performance, but American fighters were no longer fighting as individuals. December 1942, New Georgia, Solomon Islands. The introduction of new American fighters didn't make the Thach weave obsolete. It made the weave even more devastating. The Chance Vought F4U Corsair began replacing Wildcats in Marine squadrons. The Corsair could match the Zero in speed and climb while maintaining American advantages in firepower and protection. Marine pilots applied weave tactics to the more capable aircraft with lethal results. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, commanding VMF 214, the famed Black Sheep Squadron, used weave tactics exclusively with his Corsairs. In 84 days of combat, VMF 214 shot down 97 Japanese aircraft confirmed while losing only 6 pilots in air combat. Boyington himself scored 28 victories using variants of the weave adapted to the Corsair's performance characteristics. The Grumman F6F Hellcat, entering service in early 1943, provided Navy carriers with a fighter that could outperform the Zero in most categories. But Hellcat pilots continued using the weave because the tactical advantages persisted regardless of aircraft performance. Why risk an individual dogfight when coordinated section tactics guaranteed superior results? June 1943. Russell Islands, Solomon Islands. Japanese fighter doctrine attempted to adapt to American section tactics. Zero pilots were instructed to attack American formations from above, using diving speed to break through the weave before American pilots could execute their crossing turns. The tactic achieved some success, but required altitude advantage that wasn't always available. Japanese training emphasized that individual skill remained the decisive factor. The best Zero pilots could still defeat American sections through superior maneuvering, but the number of best pilots declined steadily. By mid-1943, Japan's carrier air groups had been effectively destroyed and rebuilt twice. Each iteration was less capable than the previous. The pilots facing American fighters in late 1943 averaged 200 to 300 flight hours compared to 700 to 800 hours for pilots who fought at Pearl Harbor. American pilots arriving in the Pacific averaged 600 flight hours, including extensive training in section tactics. They weren't individually superior to Japanese pilots, but they were operating within a tactical framework that maximized their collective capability while minimizing individual vulnerability. November 1943. Bougainville, Solomon Islands. The air campaign over Bougainville demonstrated how completely the tactical balance had shifted. Japanese aircraft attacked American invasion forces daily for 3 weeks. Zeros escorted every raid. American fighters, using weave tactics and superior numbers, decimated the Japanese formations. In one engagement on November 11th, 18 Corsairs from VMF 211 intercepted 70 Japanese aircraft, including 40 Zeros. The Marines used the weave to prevent the Zeros from establishing individual combat while methodically shooting down bombers. The engagement lasted 30 minutes. The Marines shot down 17 Japanese aircraft confirmed with no American losses. The battle statistics reveal the cumulative impact of the Thach weave across 2 years of combat. Between May 1942 and November 1943, American fighters in the Pacific shot down approximately 2,500 Japanese aircraft while losing approximately 800 fighters in air combat. The kill ratio improved from nearly 1-to-1 in early 1942 to over 3-to-1 by late 1942, 1943. February 1944. Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands. Operation Hailstone, the massive carrier raid against Japan's Gibraltar of the Pacific, showcased the complete dominance American naval aviation had achieved. 9 American carriers launched 1,250 sorties against Truk's defences. Japanese Zeros rose to meet them. The result was a massacre. American fighters flying weave patterns and more advanced tactical formations destroyed over 270 Japanese aircraft in 2 days while losing 25 American aircraft. The Zero's performance advantages had become irrelevant. American fighters, using tactics developed from Thach's simple weave concept, had achieved air superiority so complete that Japanese forces could barely contest American operations. June 1944, Philippine Sea. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, largest carrier battle in history, demonstrated the final evolution of American fighter tactics. American fighters faced the largest Japanese carrier airstrike since Midway. 373 aircraft attacking Task Force 58. American combat air patrols, organized in weave sections coordinated by fighter direction officers, intercepted the raid at maximum range. The engagement became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American fighters destroyed over 350 Japanese aircraft in a single day while losing 30 fighters. The slaughter resulted from superior aircraft, superior numbers, superior radar direction, and superior tactics, all working in coordination. But the foundation remained the simple principle Thach had established in 1942. 2 fighters working together were more effective than 2 fighters working separately. Japanese carrier aviation never recovered from the Philippine Sea. 3 carriers were sunk. The air groups that had embarked on those carriers were effectively destroyed. Japan's ability to conduct carrier operations ended. The remaining Japanese carriers would sail to their final battles with inadequate air groups or none at all. October 1944, Leyte Gulf, Philippines. The Battle of Leyte Gulf saw the first organized kamikaze attacks. Japanese commanders, recognizing that conventional attacks had become suicidal, formalized suicide tactics. The Zero, designed as an air superiority fighter, became a guided missile aimed at American ships. The Thach weave proved less effective against kamikaze attacks because the tactical situation had changed. Conventional attackers tried to survive. Weave tactics exploited that self-preservation instinct. Kamikaze pilots didn't care about survival. Damaged aircraft continued toward targets. The weave still destroyed attacking aircraft, but destroyed aircraft sometimes retained enough momentum to hit ships. The solution required earlier interception and complete destruction of incoming raids. American fighters pushed their combat air patrols further from the fleet, engaging Japanese formations at maximum range. The weave patterns were retained but integrated into larger tactical formations involving dozens of fighters working together to annihilate raids before they reached the fleet. August 1945, Tokyo Bay, Japan. When Admiral Chester Nimitz accepted Japanese surrender aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, the ceremony occurred under skies controlled absolutely by American naval aviation. The transformation from December 1941, when Zeros dominated every engagement, to August 1945, when Japanese aircraft rarely got airborne, represented one of the most complete reversals in military history. Multiple factors contributed: superior American industrial capacity, better pilot training systems, more advanced aircraft, radar direction, and overwhelming numerical superiority. But the foundation was laid by a simple tactical innovation developed by a lieutenant commander using matchsticks on a desk in Hawaii. The Thach weave hadn't won the air war alone. No single tactic could. But it had provided the tactical framework that allowed American pilots to survive the first critical year of the war, when American aircraft were inferior and American pilots were inexperienced. It bought time for American industry to produce better fighters, for training programs to produce more pilots, for the quantitative advantages to accumulate. Post-war analysis. Japanese fighter pilots interviewed after the war uniformly expressed respect for American tactical discipline. Zero Ace Saburo Sakai, who survived the entire war and scored 64 victories, noted that American fighters always seemed to be in position to help each other, and that individual combat became rare after 1942. Japanese tactical doctrine never adapted effectively to American section tactics. The cultural emphasis on individual skill and honor made it difficult to subordinate personal achievement to team coordination. Japanese pilots continued trying to force individual dogfights where their training and aircraft performance would have proven decisive. American pilots continued refusing those individual combats, maintaining section integrity even when it meant breaking off apparently advantageous engagements. The statistical impact was definitive. American fighter pilots in the Pacific achieved approximately 15,000 aerial victories against Japanese aircraft. American losses were approximately 4,500 fighters in air combat. The overall kill ratio of 3.3 to 1 reflected superior tactics, superior aircraft, superior numbers, and superior training all working together. The Thach weave provided the tactical foundation on which all other advantages were built. The legacy. John S. Thach retired from the Navy as a 4-star admiral in 1967. He rarely spoke publicly about the weave, deflecting credit to the pilots who executed the tactic in combat. When asked about his contribution to the war, Thach emphasized that the weave was just common sense, and that any competent pilot could have thought of it. This modesty understated a profound innovation. The Thach weave represented a fundamental shift in fighter doctrine from individual combat to coordinated teamwork. Modern fighter tactics, loose deuce formations, fighting wing concepts, mutually supporting elements, all trace their lineage to Thach's simple two-plane weave. The F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II, America's current frontline fighters, operate using tactical formations that are direct descendants of principles Thach established in 1942. Two fighters working together, each covering the other's vulnerable areas, presenting multiple threat axes to any attacker. The technology has advanced dramatically. The fundamental principle remains unchanged. Lieutenant Commander Thach, watching that first weave engagement over the Coral Sea on May 7, 1942, couldn't have known his simple tactical innovation would influence fighter doctrine for the next 80 years. He knew only that his pilots had survived an engagement that should have killed them, that the Zero's dominance had been challenged, that American fighters finally had a way to fight back. In that moment, as 6 Wildcats landed safely aboard Lexington with empty guns and multiple kills, naval aviation's trajectory changed. The age of the Zero as an invincible weapon ended. The age of American tactical innovation had begun. And the matchstick diagram on a desk in Hawaii proved that sometimes the simplest solutions to complex problems are the most revolutionary.